We are back with our panel right now. We want to look at what we're watching ahead. We know we're going to be watching terrorism this week. We want to watch the aftermath of London. What else are you watching?
The Comey testimony on Thursday is critical, and how the White House reacts to all of that.
Agree and add, I'm also curious as to whether we're going to be moving forward with any big piece of legislation. What's going on in the budget negotiations, health care bills, is Congress going to get anything done?
To that note, does the president get any mileage out of an infrastructure speech to Iowa on Wednesday?
Yeah, absolutely. And will Democrats deal? Because there's room for us to deal here.
All right, lots to cover in the week ahead. Thank you very much, Ed Rollins, Jessica Tarlov. Good to see you. That'll do it for Sunday Morning Futures. Stay with Fox News. I'm Maria Bartiromo. I'll see you tomorrow on the Fox Business Network. Stay right here. Continuing coverage.
The Fox News alert: the world still stunned by the latest London terror attack carried out by 3 knife-wielding men in a van. At the moment, at least 7 people are dead, 48 people are injured. Let's go to London for a live update.
Howie, this is where the incident occurred, just over my shoulder, about a few blocks behind me. And at this hour, we're seeing a number of people showing up here to present flowers and other objects at a makeshift memorial. As for the terror threat this hour, it remains at severe. It has not, and I underscore that, it has not been upgraded to critical as it was after the attack in Manchester. And now we're getting our best look yet at the white van that caused so much of the carnage and mayhem. Take a look at this still frame. This is the vehicle in question. This vehicle was heading south over the London Bridge last night when it plowed into pedestrians. It jumped the curb, coming to rest near a light pole. 3 men then exited the van, and then they began attempting to stab people nearby. As you mentioned, the death toll now, 7 dead, 48 wounded. Police killed the 3 attackers. The question now, did they do it on their own, or did they have any help? In the East End section of London, the neighborhood of Barking, in the last few hours, there have been a series of raids, and as of now, 12 people have been arrested. Not clear, Howie, to what, if any extent, those 12 people are connected to the carnage that took place just 16 hours ago. The investigation here continues.
Hopefully we'll find out soon. David Lee Miller, thanks for that live update from London. We appreciate it. Joining us now, Jillian Turner, White House national security official under George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Katie Pavlich, editor of townhall.com, both are Fox News contributors. And Aaron McPike, who covers the White House for Independent Journal Review. Jillian, to what extent are these attacks designed to instill fear in Britain, around the world, by generating saturation media coverage?
100%. That's pretty much, aside from killing as many people as possible during the attack itself, this is the purpose of those attacks. And to that degree, they're enjoying unprecedented success. In the last year, couple of years, this is something that ISIS has excelled at and really driven to new heights thanks to social media and the way that they reach out to the community of interested people, by that I mean potential terrorists around the world, and help to get this going.
Thankfully, Katie, this is not a huge death toll, but the heavy coverage seems justified because what this attack does is it instills a sense of fear and concern that if you're on a bridge in London, if you're shopping at London's Borough Market, that you can't be entirely sure that you are safe.
Well, and that's one of the definitions of terrorism, right, is to instill fear and to not just take people's lives, which is the worst case scenario, but to try and make sure that people don't go out and enjoy their freedoms that they have in these Western countries like the UK and the United States and all over Europe. That's certainly something that they want to do. We also see in these reports that these men who got out of the van were wearing fake suicide vests in order to instill even more fear, which obviously they probably were connecting that to the recent Manchester attack. This is not something that seems to be isolated. This is not a lone wolf problem. We have 12 suspects arrested this morning in London, and also the 18th suspect who arrested in Manchester today as a result of that suicide bombing recently. And so this is ongoing. British officials and officials all over the world are clearly having a very hard time coming to terms with this, but they're having an impact on the way that people think about whether they want to go to a crowded area or to a concert with their children.
And Aaron, President Trump reacted quickly, certainly, calling Prime Minister Theresa May, but also a series of tweets. And some found the first one odd. This was last night when the president retweeted the Drudge Report saying fears of new terrorist attack. This was after the initial ramming of pedestrians by the van, since he has access to all the top intelligence.
I'm sorry, the question is...
The question is, certainly we all want the president to speak out forcefully, and Twitter is his medium, but since he has more information than anybody else in America, some people thought it was odd that he was retreating.
Yeah, and it's possible that he didn't get a full briefing on it just yet. Maybe he's getting a full briefing this morning. In past White Houses, the president will get a briefing before the White House puts out a statement on the terrorist attack and what their plan is going forward, what they plan to do in terms of talking to other world leaders. And Jillian would certainly know this, but that is important, that these statements generally have to go through a number of layers of checks before they put them out to the public.
Right.
And the president is not doing that.
Well, that also often put the White House behind news reports, but there's always this balance between being quick and making sure that you've got it nailed down. The president also tweeting today, Jillian, that we're not having a gun debate, as often follows these terror attacks, because this particular attack in London was carried out with a van and knives by 3 people, I guess, have been shot dead. So it does show that the terror problem in this country is far broader than just a debate about gun control.
I mean, to me, that's sort of a political point, but yes, I agree with it. I think that having the gun debate today would be, in the aftermath of yesterday's attack, would be a little bit useless.
But don't political points often follow these terror attacks as different political factions try to use the event, tragic as it is, to make arguments for their side?
Well, yes, and we see that with the gun debate, and we see that with the travel ban debate. Is a policy solution to these problems one or the other? Do we restrict gun access? Do we restrict access to the country via immigration and refugee status? To me, those are both political arguments, but they're made by both sides of the aisle. I think both are equally applicable to the problem of terrorism, so both are valid for discussion. At least from a media perspective, it's important to examine both of these because these are major issues for American voters.
We'll talk more about that. Kate, I've got to ask you about this tweet by a CNN host whose name is Reza Aslan. Let's put it up, and we're cleaning it up slightly. In the wake of the London attack, Aslan writes, "This piece of blank is not just an embarrassment to America and a stain on the presidency. He's an embarrassment to humankind." Now, I don't usually do this, but this guy has a show on CNN, and he called the president a piece of excrement. Within a day, I'm wondering whether he will still have a show on CNN.
I'm not going to speculate about what CNN is going to do in response, but, you know, this, again, goes back to the double standard for the way that we treat the presidency. I think there would be a lot more attention on this today in all of the media if it was a conservative on Fox News who had a show tweeting about a Democratic president. The reaction would certainly be different, and there would be a lot more attention focused on it. It's unfortunate, and I just think it really shows where we are in the state of our politics today, that in the aftermath of a terrorist attack, this is the kind of name-calling that we see from the media towards the president.
If I might, I think it shows that there's no respect for the office. Never mind the politics or the policies of the individual. It shows a lack of respect for the importance of the
I will speculate. I would think that CNN would suspend that person for a week or two, as they have when other CNN reporters have editorialized on Twitter for things that have been less.
But is he a reporter, or is he...
He's a host. He has a
host,
show,
but he
a
might be
high-profile show.
He might be an opinion host.
And, you know, I don't mind even CNN hosts taking issue with the president's policies. This is a vicious personal attack, this language. All right. So the president was apparently watching Fox and Friends this morning. Reference was made to the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who said that there's no reason to be alarmed, addressing the people of his city, because there'll be an increased police presence in the coming days. President tweeting, "At least 7 dead, 48 wounded in terror attack," and mayor of London says there is no reason to be alarmed! Exclamation point. The president reacts to TV in real time.
Yeah, and that puts him in the same category as a pundit, and he's supposed to be the president. Now, you know, the mayor of London also said other things like, "We will never let these cowards win, and we will never be cowed by terrorism." I actually think a lot of the coverage after these attacks are fairly routine at this point. And I think we actually need to do a better job asking about next steps, and not just those political issues, but what actually a number of countries are doing about counterterrorism, because I don't think we're getting to the bottom of that at all.
We'll come back to the subject, but let me turn now to the momentous climate change decision, the president pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, garnering publicity worldwide, much of it negative. Here's just a brief look at some of what was said on the airwaves.
It is hard to think of the worst thing this president has done, but so far, this might just be the one.
This will be the day that the United States resigned as the leader of the free world.
We just watched a dangerous little man give a very, very scary speech.
The left immediately became hysterical, even more than usual.
Katie Pappas, leave aside the pundits for a moment. Did the straight news reporting on President Trump's decision here, which was obviously not popular in many quarters and in much of the world, was it fair? Did it clearly tilt against the president?
I think that it was more about attacking the president and his decision than it was about looking at what the Paris Climate Agreement actually was. This was something that was agreed to by the Obama administration. I think a lot of people, based on the coverage of the election and all of the news that we've had, really have kind of forgotten about what the Paris Climate Agreement did, what it was, what the obligations of the United States were. During the coverage, I didn't really hear about why are we in this? Why did President Obama make this decision? What are the binding factors for the United States, and how does it affect the American economy? What was the thinking behind the president's decision to pull out? It was more about calling the president a climate denier, saying that he was committing an act of treason against the American people and the world for pulling out of this agreement. There wasn't really a lot of substance and context to what the agreement actually was.
Some exceptions, I would say. Jillian, you may disagree with the president's decision, and that's fine. But it would be hard to look at the totality of the coverage, and you look at all the newspaper articles and the way it was framed and what a setback this was, and U.S. giving up its global leadership role, and to say that it wasn't largely negative. Do you agree?
Oh, I think that as a whole, the media coverage of this decision was overwhelmingly, sort of crushingly negative. And while I don't agree with the president's decision to renege on the agreement, I think the bigger point here is that it seems that a majority of my fellow Americans might actually disagree with me, in the sense that this is something that President Trump was very upfront and very forward about on the campaign trail. Almost, we were discussing in the green room, it sort of was a campaign platform issue for him. So he certainly has a mandate.
It's not surprising.
Right. My personal disagreement.
Right.
I agree with all of the points that you both made here, but I do think in flipping the script a little bit, the White House has not done a good job setting up for him making this decision. And in fact, we saw, there were reports that Gary Cohn and Ivanka Trump were trying to change his decision.
Right, so there was a debate within the White House.
I understand that, but they didn't spend time messaging this over the past 2 weeks and building support for his decision and explaining why.
He hadn't made a final decision, and there were leaks from the White House that pretty clearly indicated that the president, unless he changed his mind at the last moment, was going to do this.
I think based on his decision, regardless of whether they would have built up the support that you're talking about, he would have been criticized because, again, the coverage was not about what the climate agreement means for the country. It was about the president being a denier and his decision to tell the world that he's not interested in protecting the environment, which, by the way, we're not hearing a whole lot about the fact that he said, I'd like to renegotiate this deal. I care about the environment.
Really
Let's redo
because it was
this.
the next thing the president said, and it kind of got dismissed by the press as if he hadn't even said it, because it's almost like everyone was geared up for either yes or no was staying in. Now going in. You know what really surprised me, Katie? Hours after the president's speech announcing this, MSNBC, and liberals care passionately about the climate change. They all led with Russia. Chris Matthews, Comey, who's going to testify in a week, 8 o'clock show, the 9 o'clock show, the 10 o'clock show, all about the Russia investigation.
Well, maybe, the climate change issue on the scale of what MSNBC thinks is obviously a lower issue, and Russia has been running their coverage for weeks. It's been working for them. Their ratings are higher than they've been in years. Clearly they are going to stay on that story because it's been good for them. They think that the American people are interested in it.
Now, I've said that I thought that last week Fox News played down some of the developments in the Russia investigation, but just the fact that it happened on the day of the climate change decision, whether you wanted to attack it, praise it, or try to analyze it, just struck me as an interesting moment. Let me get a break, panel. You can let us know what you think. MediaBuzz at foxnews.com, and we'll be right back. Sean Spicer was back at the podium this week after a deluge of stories saying he looked to be on his way out as part of a larger wave of media speculation about a big White House shakeup. Katie Pavlich, if you believed all these shakeup stories, Spicer would be gone, Reince Priebus would be gone, Bannon would be gone, Jared would be on a leave of absence. Why do journalists keep writing these pieces over and over again?
Well, they're clearly getting some kind of information from someone about
from all these different factions within the White House, in part.
Somebody is giving them information about a shakeup, but as we've seen, that hasn't exactly happened yet. When it comes to Sean Spicer, I'm always curious about why journalists think that he would be on his way out, in the sense of he goes out to the podium every day whenever there's a briefing and acts the way that President Trump would act. He's speaking on behalf of the president, and his contentious attitude with the press seems to be exactly what the president would do and want. So this idea that he's somehow making the office look bad, making the president look bad. He actually speaks on behalf of the president, and I think he's doing what the president would do, and therefore, why would he be fired?
Well, Aaron, CNN made a big deal this week about one of the briefings was off camera. There was audio only, which actually the cable networks ended up taking some of that live. And CNN's liberal commentator Van Jones saying Sean is the incredibly shrinking man. First of all, it's not unusual to have off-camera briefings. Every administration has done it.
Probably do it. Spicer probably does it once a week or once every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Does an off-camera briefing.
Right.
And they do plenty of off-camera briefings with cabinet officials or other senior aides all the time to give information about things that they might be doing in the coming week or so. So, you know, I don't think it's that big of a deal. And at least we're getting information. He's getting in front of us to take questions.
Right. I mean, you can critique how he handles it. You can critique his answers, as journalists tend to do. But, I mean, he is doing his job, and it's a difficult job.
Well, by the way, TV networks don't like the off-camera briefings because they can't use it and they need the pictures. That's really what that is.
They want the ratings.
Don't care that much. But, you know, it really strikes me, Jillian, because some news outlets are just practically proclaiming it as fact when the president was overseas. Well, Sean Spicer, if he does hang on to his job, he's not going to do the briefings anymore. And it just seems that, you know, some of this is fed from factions within the White House, but some of it is just, you know, the sort of this journalistic addiction to, well, who's going to get shoved out next? I don't know that the country is breathlessly awaiting that answer to that question.
It's like addiction to palace intrigue, but I think that the media could be forgiven in this instance for this speculation about shakeups at the White House, because if you look elsewhere in other corners of the White House, there have been spectacular shakeups in the first 100 days. If you look at national security policy, we had an FBI director who was fired, a national security advisor who was fired, a deputy who's being posted elsewhere. We've got the acting attorney general fired. So shakeups is not, you know, the media could be forgiven for extrapolating from conflict that shakeups are going to happen.
I'm a little less tolerant on that. And the communications director, Mike Dupke, was let go after 3 months. He didn't have much of an impact. But why is this gotten so personal toward Sean Spicer? I mean, I know he's sort of this very famous figure now because of the live coverage and the SNL parodies. But when you have, again, CNN's Van Jones saying he looks like a depressed little kid up there, I mean, he's trying to do his job, and he has gotten a little more terse in his answers, but I think that's an effort to stay on message.
Yeah, I think some of it is that reporters don't like when he gives information that may be false or not totally accurate. But I would disagree a little bit on a larger point. I think local papers are doing a lot better coverage. They're actually covering the substance of what the administration is doing. They're pulling back some regulations. And I talked to a reporter from the Salt Lake Tribune yesterday who was talking about how certain regulations are affecting that state. And local papers don't have an appetite for the palace intrigue at all. They're actually covering the real stuff that's happening.
Just briefly, Katie, at the last briefing, Sean Spicer made it clear that all the questions related to the Russia investigation, he is now simply going to refer to the president's private lawyer and try to keep it out of that briefing room.
Well, I mean, that was one of the benefits of this special counsel coming in, because now the White House doesn't actually have to answer any questions related to this investigation, as if they were going to do that anyway. It does give the White House an out, and it's certainly going to give journalists even more work to do in terms of digging in to find that information.
It's a tactic that other administrations have used as well. Katie Pavlich, Aaron McPike, thanks very much. Jillian, stick around. And as we go to break, let's take a look at a live picture of London. This is Scotland Yard in the wake of the terror attack on the bridge. 3 attackers have been killed. We'll talk more about that with Jillian Turner in just a moment. This is a Fox News alert. I'm told that we are awaiting a briefing in Scotland Yard on the London terror attacks.
I'm going to understand more about them, about their connections, and about whether they were assisted or supported by anyone else. As I think you're aware, there are searches ongoing in East London, and 12 arrests have already been made. There is clearly more to do, and we will work relentlessly to get to the facts. We have established that the van used during the attack was a white Renault van that was recently hired by one of the attackers. As our understanding grows, we now understand that the van at London Bridge started the attack at 21:58 hours yesterday as he went from north to south on the river, with members of the public calling police a few minutes later. The van mounted the pavement and collided with pedestrians before being abandoned, where attackers were armed with knives, continued into the Borough Market area, stabbing numerous people. The attackers were then confronted by the firearms officers, and I can confirm that 8 police firearms officers discharged their weapons. Whilst this will be subject to an investigation by the IPCC, our initial assessment is in the region of 50 rounds, in the region of 50 bullets were fired by those 8 officers. The 3 attackers were shot dead. The situation these officers were confronted with was critical. A matter of life and death. 3 armed men wearing what appeared to be suicide belts. They had already attacked and killed members of the public and had to be stopped immediately. Indeed, I'm not surprised that when faced with what they must have feared were 3 suicide bombers, the firearms officers fired an unprecedented number of rounds to be completely confident that they had neutralised the threat that those men posed. I am humbled by the bravery of an officer who will rush towards a potential suicide bomber thinking only of protecting others. As the officers confronted the terrorist, a member of the public also suffered a gunshot wound. Although the injuries are not critical in nature, they are in hospital receiving medical attention, and we will of course keep you updated on that. 7 people have been killed in addition to the 3 attackers. Work to inform the next of kin of the victims is ongoing, and this may take some time as we believe some of the victims are from abroad. On top of that, we have 36 people remaining in hospital suffering from a range of injuries. Some of these are extremely serious, and 21 remain in critical condition. You will have heard today about the British Transport Police officer who sustained injuries in the attack, responding to the incident. I can also confirm that an off-duty Metropolitan Police officer based on Southwark Borough was caught up in the attack. Fortunately, he has not suffered life-threatening injuries. He remains in hospital. The investigation team are taking statements from hundreds of witnesses, and I again appeal to anybody with information or footage on the incident to make contact with the police. The cordons in place around London Bridge and around Borough Market area will remain in place for a little while yet, and we'd encourage the public to avoid the area whilst our investigation continues. This is likely to have some impact on travel arrangements in the first part of tomorrow morning, and we'd ask everyone to check with their travel operators and seek alternate routes where necessary. Now, the public can expect to see additional police, both armed and unarmed, across the capital over forthcoming days, and our security plans and policing plans for forthcoming events are being reviewed. You will also see increased physical measures in order to keep the public safe on London's bridges. Finally, I ask the public to remain calm but vigilant, and if you see anything suspicious, no matter how insignificant you think it might be, please don't hesitate to contact the police, either on 999 or the anti-terrorism hotline 0800 789 321. I'll take a couple of questions.
Do you think all the main perpetrators were shot dead by your office?
We're increasingly confident that this attack was conducted by 3 individuals. Clearly we need to establish whether there's any associates or anyone else involved in the planning.
Is anything that you've got suggesting that the men were known police security services before?
I want to finish the work on confirming the identity of those involved before I give further details in respect of that.
What's the military involvement, if any, in the operation last night?
So we have a routine plans for a terrorist incident to immediately summon specialist support from the military to be available where necessary. This incident was resolved though by police officers as the first responders.
So the military arrived after it had been dealt with, or they didn't arrive?
The military weren't involved in the resolution of this incident. Thank you all very much.
Mark Rowley, London police official, briefing the media on the terror attack on London Bridge, and we're back with Gillian Turner. What did you take away from that briefing? Did you learn anything? Did we learn anything new?
Definitely didn't learn anything new, but what this shows me is that law enforcement right now, at least in the UK, is still in the tactical phase of this investigation. They're focused on the who, what, when, where. They haven't looked at the why yet. They're cautiously sort of now affirming that it was terrorist related, but beyond that, things like motives and larger connections and terrorist networks is not something they have really penetrated yet. They're going to work on that over the next 48 hours.
So many unanswered questions, as there often are in the wake of these terror attacks. Gillian Turner, thank you very much for joining us. We're happy to have you here this Sunday. And let's go now to Manchester, New Hampshire. Corey Lewandowski, the president's first campaign manager, still an informal advisor, is joining us now. Corey, you come in the middle of a breaking news event, as you know. Let me ask you, with President Trump tweeting this morning, among the things that he said about the London attack, we must stop being politically correct and get down to the business of security for our people. What did he mean by politically correct?
Well, Howie, as you know, first and foremost, our thoughts and prayers are with the victims and the families in London, and the president said that he will stand firm with anything he can do to help the people there. I know he's had a conversation with the prime minister over there and has pledged his support, but you have to remember, we have seen courts legislating from the bench, prohibiting the president from implementing a program which will call for extreme vetting coming into the United States. These are the same courts which have decided to legislate from the bench as opposed to interpret the rules that the president clearly has a constitutional authority to implement on behalf of the people of our country. And what he said was, our system is not designed right now to make sure that we know who's coming into our country, so we have to stop being politically correct so that we're saving American lives, and hopefully we don't have terrorist attacks on our own soil.
But, Corey, several different courts have found that two different versions of the ban did not pass constitutional muster. This is heading now to the Supreme Court. I understand you, the President, and a lot of American people feel strongly about it, but that is the role of courts in our society, is it not?
Well, it is, but the question is, does the president have the constitutional authority, which is the same authority that George W. Bush used, Barack Obama used, and dates all the way back to World War II, to preclude people from coming into the country of the United States, which is a great privilege and an honor, until we know exactly who they are. And what we've seen is that we're now going to have the opportunity to check people's social media activities, because it wasn't that long ago where the San Bernardino killer came in under a K-1 visa, committed a jihad, and if we would have had the opportunity to look at her social media activity, we would have seen that she was exactly going to do that when she came to this country.
Let me move on now to the president's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Highly controversial, as you know, an avalanche of coverage, much of it negative in tone. Do you feel like the press, in covering this, kind of glossed over the fact that during the campaign, when you were advising Donald Trump, that he promised to do this, that this was a campaign promise that he was carrying out?
Well, this is the thing, Howie. This president can't win with the mainstream liberal media. If he would have stayed into the Paris Accord, which, as you know, is completely voluntary, and countries like China and India and Russia pay zero as part of this, if he would have stayed in, the mainstream media would have said, see, the president has flip-flopped, he's changed his position on the campaign, and he has no principles. Instead, what he did was exactly what he said he was going to do, which is exactly what he campaigned on, which is he said that it's a $2.5 trillion expense over the next 10 years. It's 6 million jobs lost. It's a $3 billion slush fund to the United Nations, of which the United States is paying all of it. And he said, this is a bad deal for the U.S. We're going to pull out of it based on merits.
Corey, several reporters have asked a number of top administration officials in recent days whether Donald Trump himself believes, as he has suggested in the past, that climate change is not real, or whether it's some kind of hoax perpetrated by the Chinese. And the questions have all been deflected. Why is that such a difficult question to answer?
Well, look, I think it's very clear that the president speaks for the president, but what he has said, and he's been on the record in the past, of what he believes climate change and if it's real or if it isn't real. And I think the only person who's going to speak for the president on this is the president. He's the most accessible president we've ever had. He is exceptionally accessible, not just to the American people through Twitter, but also to the media coverage, and we've seen that through the White House Correspondents Association. They say that he's unbelievably accessible. And so I'm sure they'll have the opportunity to directly ask the president that question.
Good point. You wrote in The Hill the other day, and it was a piece on climate change and how you think the president made the right decision. Even though the mainstream media would like you to believe President Trump's first 4 months were not a success, are you arguing that it's been a smashing success and the press has completely misinterpreted what's happened?
Howie, if you think about this, the president has a Supreme Court justice, which by all accounts was exceptionally qualified. He has him sitting on the bench. The president got no credit for negotiating the release of a U.S. citizen in an Egyptian prison, which Barack Obama couldn't get done. He literally got no credit for this. He's put jobs back. He's put jobs back on the table. The economy is booming. The stock market is at the highest it's been. If you look at the last month, there was supposed to be 185,000 new jobs created. There was 250,000 new jobs created. By every measure that you can look at, This administration has been successful, and the mainstream media has given him no credit. That doesn't even include all the executive orders that he's done, which allows coal miners and steel workers back to work and stops countries from dumping their goods on our soil without some kind of repercussion.
Corey, you were at the White House this week. It is no secret that the president has asked you to consider joining the White House staff, given how close you were to him during the campaign. Is that something that you are still open to considering?
You know, I've been very, very lucky that I had a front row seat of history to help him become elected president of the United States. I had a small role in it, and I think I can be very effective for the president on the outside. I think there's a lot of things that I can do and say to help him from the outside. If he were to say to me, Corey, I absolutely need you to come in, it would be a tough family decision. I've got young kids. I live in New Hampshire. I've got a great life. And look, I'm willing to serve my country in any capacity possible, but I think there's a lot of ways that I can do this from the outside to make sure that his agenda of tax reform and infrastructure spending and repealing replacement of Obamacare and building the wall on the southern border all get done.
Well, these are tough family decisions given the backbreaking nature of these White House jobs. And for the record, you had more than a small role in the campaign. But you have spoken out about leaks from inside the White House, and there's been pretty much a constant flow of these leaks from unnamed officials. Sometimes they're designed to make another faction or another official look bad. We've seen a lot of that with these shake-up stories, or alleged shake-up, I should say. And sometimes they kind of make the president look like he is not completely in control, or they reflect badly on the president. As somebody who's at least considering going inside, what do you make of this constant flow of leaks to reporters about the boss?
Well, Howie, I've said it many times, now it bears repeating. Anybody who is not on the president's team should not be working either in the White House or in this administration in any capacity. And anybody who continues to leak information to the media for their own benefit or at the detriment of some of their employees or colleagues that they're working for should not be in this administration in any way, shape, or form.
You think they should be fired? If they can be identified, you think they should be fired?
Look, absolutely, Howard, and I'll tell you why. Because not only are you hurting your colleagues who you have to work next to on a daily basis, you're hurting the president and you're hurting our country. And what we've seen is there's been reports now that classified information has been leaked out. We've seen what happened in the previous administration was unmasking was being taking place for political reasons. If anybody has been part of that, they shouldn't be there. This president was elected to change Washington. He needs people around him who want to help him do that. And if they are leaking information about the president or about their colleagues that shouldn't be out there, they should absolutely be gone and go find themselves a job in the private sector.
Corey Lewandowski, thanks very much for joining us on a very busy Sunday. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good to see you. And we will be right back with more Media Buzz in just a moment. Pelly is suddenly out at the CBS Evening News. This after 6 years anchoring the third-place newscast. Pelly, who'll join 60 Minutes full-time, never had a high public profile, though he did stir controversy over the way he has covered President Trump.
It has been a busy day for presidential statements divorced from reality. His boasting and tendency to believe conspiracy theories have led to a deficit of credibility.
Joining us now is Terrence Smith, one-time CBS correspondent who also worked for the New York Times and the PBS NewsHour. And Terry,
good morning, Howie.
Was Scott Pelley basically bounced for low ratings, or was this something more? It's such a messy breakup. I mean, his office was cleaned out while he was overseas, disputing accounts about that, and no successor lined up. So pretty messy.
It was very messy, and it got out of control of the network, and I'm sure they don't like the way it has unraveled. But neither does Scott Pelley. I think, yes, ratings were certainly the primary cause. He'd been there for 6 years. They didn't see, I gather, much chance that he would build the ratings at this point. So they thought it was time to get somebody else. You know, there's an old line about when the evening news starts going down, you know, network division gets nervous. First they change the set.
Right.
That doesn't work.
New design.
Yeah, right. Then they change the executive producer. That usually doesn't work either. And finally, they go to the anchor. But in this case, they went to stage 3 right away.
Right away.
DEFCON 3, you could
some
call
of the loaded language we saw Scott Pelley using against President Trump, I think would be fine for a cable host to use, but a big 3 network anchor, I wonder. I don't know that it was a factor here, or maybe he knew he was on the way out and he just wanted to vent some of his feelings about the president or get some attention.
No, I'm told that it was, not a factor in the decision to remove him. that the management they were comfortable with what he was saying and the way he was saying it. Certainly unusual for an evening news host. And yet, I'm told really reliably that Steve Kappas, the executive producer, and management were not concerned about that. They worried about not only ratings, but what was happening to the evening news, where was the audience going, ratings are down. They were making progress on the CBS morning news, with CBS This Morning, which is longer, has more ads, makes more money, and they were making progress with John Dickerson at Face the Nation.
Right. Now, I'm also told that very strained relations, barely on speaking terms, between Scott Pelley and CBS News President David Rhodes, who's not the guy who gave Pelley the job. That was Jeff Fager, who's now at 60 Minutes, will be reunited. Beyond the personality clashes, which are often a factor here, look, you worked at CBS in the Dan Rather era. I covered the story when Katie Couric got the CBS anchor job. It was a huge national story, similar for Diane Sawyer, big star at ABC. Now one of the big three network anchors gets dumped, and it hasn't really caused much of a ripple. What happened?
What happened is what happened to television, to the evening news broadcast as a centerpiece. There simply are no more Walter Cronkites, the most trusted man in America. That's why you don't see an obvious replacement just coming right up for Scott Pelley. The evening news is simply not what it used to be. Cable news ratings are rising. The network broadcasts are losing audience, and yet they may not be the national hearth that they once were for the whole country, but they still, among them, bring in about 22 million viewers a night.
They're still a big combined franchise. We got about half a minute here, but it seems to me that once all the networks moved away from the sort of Dan Rather, Katie Couric, Diane Sawyer model, that all the network anchors now are a little bit more workmanlike. I mean, Scott Pelley was a very good reporter. I never thought he was an
excellent reporter.
But I never thought he was a natural anchor.
I would agree with that. I think he did a very fine broadcast. It had the most news content of all the broadcasts, and he's a very good guy. But they felt it was time for a different style.
Right. You would think they would have this all orchestrated, but these breakups are often messy, as we said at the top. Terry Smith, great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Harry.
And if you watch the whole Kathy Griffin, President Trump thing, it just got out of control this week. We'll have a report on that in just a moment. At first, CNN said it was evaluating the Kathy Griffin situation, but the network let her go, fired her from the New Year's Eve extravaganza after this image, after she pulled this grotesque stunt of posing with the decapitated head, a bloody Trump mask, and after the condemnation grew so loud on the left and the right. It was then that the comedian made a video apology.
What's wrong?
Fine, but then, at a tearful news conference on Friday, Griffin tried to shift the blame to the president's family.
I
spoke earlier with Carly Shimkus, a reporter for Fox's Sirius XM station, 24/7 Headlines. Carly Shimkus, welcome.
Good to be here.
So Kathy Griffin thinks that Donald Trump broke her, that he's responsible for CNN dumping her, for sponsors bailing, for 5 concert dates being canceled. Excuse me, isn't this in reaction to what she did?
Yeah, you know what they say? They say the cover-up is always worse than the crime, and I think that analogy pertains quite nicely to the disaster of a press conference that we saw on Friday. And the most mind-boggling part of this whole thing is she's now accusing the president of trying to ruin her career when she's the one who held up the fake decapitated head of President Trump. So for her to play the victim is crazy. You know, she's saying that she has her free speech right to do whatever she wants. Well, you know what, Howie? The president and his family also have their free speech right to speak out against her.
I was going to make that point. I mean, the president sent out a tweet. Melania Trump put out a statement. They were reacting to what she had done, but there was a lot of talk at this presser about the First Amendment, about censorship. This is happening because she's a woman. And I have to ask you, you know, nobody's trying to stop Kathy Griffin from telling jokes about Donald Trump or anyone else, but companies have a right not to associate with her, correct?
Yeah, of course. And the whole sexist argument, I think women should actually be very offended by that, because there are real examples of sexism that happen every single day. But the president tweeting about Kathy Griffin isn't something that you can say is sexist. It's because she mocked she pretended to be a terrorist and thought it was funny. It has nothing to do with sexism. So I think that actually women should be very offended by her bringing that into this argument. What a total excuse.
Yeah, I think she should have stuck with her original apology, which at least seemed heartfelt. Now, CNN, there was some initial hesitation. First, the network said nothing. Then it said, we're evaluating the situation. As the storm of criticism got louder, CNN severing its ties with Kathy Griffin, who, of course, had been a fixture on the New Year's Eve specials with Anderson Cooper. Did the network really have any choice here?
No, I don't think that they had any choice. I think that CNN actually acted within a relatively appropriate time frame. They came out, they condemned the picture, and then around 24 hours later, they severed ties with her. Of course, other companies, Squatty Potty in particular, pulled the plug on her endorsement.
Once you've lost Squatty Potty, the career is going downhill.
You gotta go, absolutely.
Yeah. And Anderson Cooper, to his credit, you know, her co-star on these New Year's Eve things, he very quickly tweeted some very tough language about what she had done. But I'm wondering this, and pull back the camera a little bit, look at the sort of Hollywood hatred of this president. Do you think Kathy Griffin may have thought she would have gotten not just laughs but applause for doing this this outrageous photo stunt? Because, you know, others have either paid no price or actually it's helped their careers, whether it's Madonna musing about blowing up the White House or Stephen Colbert telling that crude sex joke about Trump and Putin.
100%. And Kathy Griffin really isn't the first celebrity to threaten the president physically. Of course, Snoop Dogg made that music video earlier this year pointing a fake gun at the president. Like you said, Madonna blowing up the White House. Robert De Niro said that he wanted to punch the president. And I think the media also is partly to blame here as well. There was a recent study that said that 80% of the president's news coverage in the first 100 days was largely negative. So in the words of Donald Trump Jr., this is shocking, but it really doesn't come as any surprise that Kathy Griffin would think that this would be a well-received image.
Well, I don't think she was trying to threaten the president. I do think it was grotesque, and she is paying a price, and it's not because of anything the president said. It's because the country, left and right, was kind of repulsed by this. Carly Shimkus, great to see you.
Good to see you.
Now, at least there's some kind of line that you can't cross in terms of vicious personal attacks on the president. And CNN ultimately did the right thing. No way the network could have put her on with one of its top anchors, Anderson Cooper. And Bill Maher apologized yesterday for calling himself a House N-word, using the actual word. In an interview with Senator Ben Sasse, Maher said he used an offensive word in the banter of a live moment and is very sorry. HBO, which runs his show, called the use of the racial epithet completely inexcusable and tasteless. And I agree with that. We'll be right back with some final thoughts.